Okay, wonderful. So with that, I'll get started. Thank you everybody for coming today. This conversation is being sponsored by NASFLA, which is our home organization, North American Systemic Functional Linguistics Association. I'm going to drop into the chat our website URL, as well as if you would like to be added to the listserv to know about these types of events and other events that we have going on, you can sign up and you'll get that information. We don't send too many emails, so you don't have to worry so much about your inbox, but it'll keep you up to date about events and activities that we're doing.
Sabrina,
Yes, Beth,
I'm
please.
so sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
When you all go to that link, you're going to see that it's down, and I just found that out, and I don't know why. So we'll figure it out. But usually that's where you can find us. You can also find us now at Blue Sky, and I'll put that link in the chat. So again, the NASFLA website seems to be down. I'll figure out why that is, but definitely check back later. We would love to have you sign up for our newsletter.
Okay, great. So we are so excited to be here today with Dr. Maria Brisk, who is going to talk to us about her fabulous work to date with AI. And I'm joined with my colleague, Laura Shell Lacrone, who's at Lesley University. I'm Sabrina Simbiante. I'll let Laura take it away. We're going to have an introduction for Dr. Brisk. We'll have about 60 minutes of conversation. Laura and I have some questions we'd love to ask Dr. Brisk about her work, and we have 30 minutes at the end for general conversation. So if you have any questions as we're going through, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A box. And what we'll do is when we hit that 30 minutes at the end, the 30-minute opportunity to converse as an audience, we'll go through those questions at that point. So thanks so much, Laura.
Thanks, Sabrina. It is my great pleasure and an honor to introduce Dr. Maria Estela Brisk. Dr. Brisk is Professor Emerita at the Lynch School of Education and Human Development at Boston College. And for decades, Dr. Brisk's work has focused on language and education, and specifically the intersections between literacy and bilingualism. She began teaching in the mid-1960s, and there are many among us who are her students, affectionately known as Brisk babies, because not only do we remain connected to her, but also to one another. Although Maria Stella Brisk may have recently retired from her position as Professor of Language and Literacy at Boston College, she's not slowed down. She teaches online graduate courses for the Asian University for Women in Bangladesh on teaching genres of writing, and that will be the focus of our conversation today. Dr. Brisk also published a thoroughly revised second edition of her book on SFL genre pedagogy for KA classrooms, based on over 17 years of collaborative research in the Boston Public Schools. She continues to teach and revise online courses for BC and work closely with schools, teachers, and multilingual and minoritized school children in the greater Boston area, not to mention travel the world. It is through this work and the work of her students that Dr. Brisk has had an unparalleled influence on the lives of bilingual learners and their teachers. Dr. Brisk holds degrees from the Universidad Nacional de Córdoba in Argentina, Georgetown University, and the University of New Mexico. She also recently won the AERA Bilingual Research SIG Lifetime Achievement Award and chaired the 2018 International Systemic Functional Congress at Boston College. She's written dozens of books, continues to write, has multiple manuscripts in progress, and scholarly journal publications, and spoken around the world, and has served as a translator, Spanish instructor for the US Peace Corps, and even an expert witness on court cases on desegregation and bilingual education. For decades, Dr. Brisk has served as a role model in our field with that rare combination of brilliance, humility, generosity, kindness, and the highest of standards, and an equal measure of support and an extraordinary work ethic. Today, we are most fortunate to have Dr. Brisk engage in the NASFLA conversation. SFL-informed ChatGPT used to support graduate students' writing. So I'm going to start the conversation with our first question. Are you ready, Dr. Brisk?
I am.
Wonderful. Can you
And before you start, I just wanted to show everybody I have my SFL design pen here with a tenor fillet mode.
Thank you.
That NASFLA gave me. Sorry.
No, it's wonderful. Can you please tell us a little bit about the students and the goals of the course? What inspired you to integrate ChatGPT into the SFL genre pedagogy course?
So I teach a course on teaching the genres of writing at the Asian University for Women in Bangladesh. I teach it online. And it's part of a Master's of Education that is offered there. It started as a program for Afghani women that were being airlifted out of Kabul to come to the university because they were highly prepared people, and of course their lives had come to a screeching stop. And but now, so that was the first year, or 3 years ago. In my current course that I just finished this fall, I had 6 nationalities. I have Afghani and Bangladesh were the majority, and then I had from Myanmar, Rohingya refugees. I had people from India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen. So it's become very varied, and so the course is a very practical course, and it teaches them 2 things. I go through the teaching and learning cycle with them while they produce an argument essay on some aspect of education that they are learning in other courses. And then the other assignment is they have to do a mini unit to teach children of any age, depending on what they're doing. Some work with Rohingya refugees, some work online with girls, high school girls in Afghanistan, some work with what they call the pre-undergraduate program at the university. So it's a range of ages. And your second question, why did I decide to use ChatGPT? Well, what happened is last year they used ChatGPT to write the darn final paper of the argument after I had done all the TLC and everything. And that got me mad, So after, when I started to calm down, I said, well, what can I do to make it a positive solution? And so I decided to integrate and make them use ChatGPT rather than get angry at them. They were quite surprised, I must tell you. So.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brisk. And I just wanted to point out that even though you are officially retired and have been doing this for decades and decades, you continue to lead the way. That among us, we know that people have different reactions to student use of AI, and flipping it and making it a central feature of the course is something that can inspire all of us. To continue the conversation, have you noticed any ways in which the different linguistic and cultural backgrounds of students in your graduate course have influenced their engagement with writing in general, and then with SFL and Chat GPT in particular?
Yeah, well, I think what really makes a difference, there was a range of difference in the course. The only thing they all had in common, that these women are powerful and motivated and strong and want to get ahead, and they drive me crazy because they want their projects to be perfect. But you know, some have very strong academic background and English background. The university teaches everything in English, so they must know English before they come. But other women have had a rough life. Some of them have been victims of war and persecution and been in refugees camps. Others have family pressures, and you know that part that you know, a lot of the cultures, but it's all over the world. The women have a lot of obligations from family that sometimes get in their way of their studies. So that made a difference, you know, in the level of preparation, in the level of academic proficiency in English, but not except for one this year. Except for one student, there was no diminishing in terms of the level of motivation to want to learn, and that was totally admirable. I mean, after working with this women, I can't complain about anything, you know. The other difference is that although most of them use ChatGPT for everything, if they are asked a question in a class, they first go to ChatGPT. If they have to write an email, they go to ChatGPT. If they have to write a paper, they go to Chat. But there were a couple of women in the course who had never done it, and so they were a little bit more insecure about what to do and how to do it. But
I think that really leads very nicely to our next question, which is if you could tell us more about how you moved from them going to Chat GPT as a tool for everything to actually incorporating it into the instruction in the course. So in what ways did you instruct them about the use of Chat GPT or use it as a focus for analytical work?
yeah, well, first I want to clarify the goals of using. One is I thought it could improve their academic English. You know, they have to use it in all the courses they're doing at the master's level. So I thought that might be something that might be helpful. And I had experience of the different levels from the years before. So I thought that could be one thing. The other thing is that I want them to be critical of ChatGPT, to use it, but be critical. And to be critical, I wanted them to use the SFL lens. That way they could also learn about SFL. So I tell you in general a little bit how we integrated, and then we can go into more detail. But of the two papers they had to do, we used it most for the argument paper. And for that, they had 3 tasks in which they had to use ChatGPT. So when I do that, I act as a teacher using the TLC. So we did joint construction of an outline or a plan for their argument and together, and then I send them off to write their own plan for their argument, and then run it through ChatGPT and decide what would be their final plan, and that's what they turned in. And they always will put in bold whatever came from ChatGPT. Then the second task, I asked them to take one topic from their outline and turn it into a paragraph, and then run it through ChatGPT with a specific. I gave them the prompts and because I had tested the prompts to mostly deal with grammar and structure, and language and that sort of stuff in the paragraph, and then they had to put what they had written, what ChatGPT gave them as suggestions for changing, and then they had to say, I will accept this change because, I will not accept this change because. And my hope was that because would be phrased through the SFL they were learning in the course. Well, that was too optimistic for me. SFL is like going to Mars for them. And so it was kind of early in the course, and they weren't very confident on it. So they ended up saying, well, I accept this because it makes it more clear. I don't accept this because what I mean is this other thing, and I think my phrasing means what I mean, and things like that. But they weren't specific enough. So then they had to draft the final argument, and I looked at that draft to see what they did completely on their own, and then I asked them to run it through ChatGPT, and then decide what they were accepting or not. And this time, I gave them much more scaffolding. So I listed things that I wanted them to notice theoretically, based on the SFL theory. So I say, these are the aspects of language that are important for argument, and they were all voice. So they were evaluative language, person, modality, graduation, let's see, and the language that you use to introduce the word of others. And then I had focused on three important aspects of written language that I had also taught them specifically. And that is, one is packing clauses into noun groups, nominalization, and theme new information. So they had to put examples of those things from their text and from the suggestions of ChatGPT, and then explain what was the value of having those changes. But they had the SFL perspective there, and that worked better, and a lot of students showed that they understood the SFL theory and that they could see it in the text. But without that scaffolding, it was very hard for them to see it in the text. Some were still kind of lost, and they would, say this is graduation and it was morality or something like that. Some were a little bit off, but in general, it was much more helpful. So anyway, so that's the way that I integrated. Now, one thing that I think is very important from my way of doing is that ChatGPT is never the first word and never the last word. The student always has the first word, then comes ChatGPT, and then the student has the last word. And I think that is important. And so that in the perception of their own capacity, and seeing just as a tool that may not always do the right thing, but still can be helpful. And I should find ways of taking advantage of it. But I am the writer, and I am the one that has the first word and the last word in the work I produced. So that was a major use, and I think the more significant when we go into more detail. For the other project, for the mini unit, the one thing I said, it's difficult for you to find resources sometimes to have mentor texts. So I told them to have ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT, give me a scientific sequential explanation to teach whatever for third graders or for sixth graders or something like that. And that was helpful because it's very hard for them. They don't have the big libraries with kids stuff, and their internet may not or work at home when they're preparing the lessons and things like that. So that was helpful. But in terms of SFL, but that was also good for SFL because they had to look at what ChatGPT gave them and see whether whether the structure was the structure of the SFL genre. But I think the argument showed a lot more interesting things.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brisk. Before I turn it over to Sabrina, who's going to continue the questions, I just wanted to recognize that you were empowering these powerful women. You were giving them opportunities to improve their own writing. You were helping them to take up the meta language of SFL through scaffolds and providing a resource for mentor texts for their own creation of the unit plans. So it seems that there were multiple ways in which this process unfolded that were supportive. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina, who has the next series of questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Laura. So Dr. Brisk, I love your framing of from the very beginning how you were angry at ChatGPT or their use of ChatGPT at the beginning, and then you reframed, right, and said, well, they're using it, so what does that mean for the learning teaching process, right? So similar to that, what were, if you wanted to expand upon the key successes and the challenges that you observed in using ChatGPT to help students write argumentative essays?
Well, I'm gonna look a little bit at my notes because I want to give very specific examples. So I think ChatGPT gave them some really good suggestions with respect to language, with respect to grammar from the SFL perspective. So there were some simple suggestions like put the S at the end of the third person, which is sort of typical of second language learner. Remember, these people, English is like their fifth language, So I tell them, don't worry about it. You're doing much better than half of the work. And so that kind of thing they did. But what interested me more is there was a lot of teaching of this business of how to pack language from a clause to a complex noun group. So for instance, one student wrote, is a powerful approach to teaching elementary students. And ChatGPT suggested it's a powerful teaching approach for elementary students. So it went from a clause to a complex noun group. So I emphasize, and I we discussed those examples, and I emphasize that a lot. Then another aspect of the very important of the written language, and the ChatGPT did a lot of this, is the business. What do you have for theme in a sentence? So one student had written this can result. So this was the theme, and ChatGPT said this disparity can result. Then in another case, a student had high expectations. That was the theme. Can damage self-esteem, motivation, and well-being. So ChatGPT changed it to students' self-esteem, motivation, and overall well-being suffer under high expectations. So anyway, so it turned the clause around to make the theme what the student was writing about. So there was a lot of that, a lot of good suggestions for having a theme that it was of written language. In oral language, everything goes in the new information, and the theme is it or this or there, and that's how people write. So that was great. They also suggested nominalizations, and then there was a lot of suggestions for evaluative language and graduation. The word many was the typical example of graduation in the papers. So ChatGPT kept suggesting other words or suggesting, for instance, one student wrote test results. Then ChatGPT switched to numerous studies. Numerous studies was much more powerful in terms of being persuasive than just plain test results. Typical, many students write arguments like if they were reports. They're completely factual. There is no none of that type of language. And one student wrote many elementary, and ChatGPT suggested a significant percentage of elementary. There was a lot of that kind of thing. A little less, but still there, the business of modality. Students tend to use weak models just in case they are saying the wrong thing so that the professor doesn't get angry at them. And so one student wrote, excessive academic pressure can harm students' well-being. And ChatGPT suggested excessive academic pressure inevitably harms students' well-being. You see the difference that it makes for an argument to have that sort of thing. So, and there were many of these kinds of examples, but I wanted to give you specific to see how, from an NASFLA point of view, how helpful it can be if you make them see what is the function of what those words are doing for their argument. When that one problem that of ChatGPT, you all also asked me about the challenges, is that the comments it gives, it gives the suggestion of what they should write, but then they give a comment, and the comment is, oh, it's just because it makes it more clear or something like that. So which is useless. But instead, if you talk about theme new information, if you talk about packing complex sound groups and stuff like that, then they have tools for them to make their language better, and they know how to use those tools. So the other problem, I have to read you this because it's a beauty. This is what ChatGPT comment when the student missed the S for the third person. It says, refine the wording to ensure clarity and consistency. Can you imagine? Why does it say just use the darn S after the third person singular, you know? Anyway, that's why ChatGPT just, you know, raises my blood pressure sometimes. So the other thing that ChatGPT doesn't do, the cheap version, the free version, and these students, that's all they can use. So that's the reality, and that's what one of the experts told me, that the ones you pay for would do that, but the free version only sees at the clause level and the word level, and as a result, it didn't make good suggestions in terms of the text level. So, for instance, one student who had the most trouble writing, her English, I mean, she spoke 2 languages. Her husband spoke 2 other languages. I mean, so she lived in a household for 4 languages. By the time English came, you know, it was somewhere there in the brain, but not strong. Anyway, she wrote a plan for her argument in which she states the thesis, previews the arguments, and then I mean the reasons, and then goes to list the reasons with a suggested possible evidence. Well, the reasons she had previewed and the reasons she listed were not the same, and ChatGPT didn't say anything because it cannot see at the text level. So that, you know, so that you cannot count on that kind of improvement. So the other mixed success, as I mentioned it before, is that it initially was hard for them to see through an NASFLA lens. So that's something that I need to work more. And I interviewed them, and in the interview they say they want more scaffolding on how to do this, how to use the NASFLA lens. But the way I structure, as I mentioned, gave them more confidence in themselves and in their authority over ChatGPT. You know, they mentioned that they were not just taking ChatGPT; they were much more critical about ChatGPT, and they wouldn't go to it first. So that I think, I hope I didn't overdo it, but that's sort of a sense of what worked and what didn't work in terms of ChatGPT and in terms of what I was doing. You know, I was building the plane while we were flying. You know, I had never done this before. It was just so I was trying my best. So, and I don't use ChatGPT, so I'm you know, I'm a hypocrite there. So anyway.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that it's like making the plane while you're flying it, because I think that is very much characterizes where many of us are in our own teaching. in institutions where students are using ChatGPT, there's free use of ChatGPT, and so ChatGPT or AI tools. And so the question really is, it's not really about is it being used? It's going to be used. It's here. It's not going anywhere. And so the conversation now needs to lead to how do we interact with it, right? And even more nuanced, like the points that you're making is, how do we support students' use of it while sustaining their ownership and agency, right, of it, right, and not letting it overtake them, their critical thinking. So that leads us to the next question, which I'm sure, along with the others, everyone is really interested to know about. What would your recommendations be for using ChatGPT or other AI tools in graduate level writing courses worldwide? But I can imagine much of what you've shared already can be applied to other contexts and age groups as well. So your recommendations for you.
And one thing, and I don't know where I'm getting ahead, but one thing that I didn't mention in relation to the challenges, and that's the reason why I always had the students write first, is that ChatGPT, because of the language models they use, it can whitewash the students' culture. I did an experiment. I took the first day, the first Zoom meeting. My course is all online, so everything is on the web, but we have these Zoom meetings. And the first Zoom meeting, I have them write an argument, their code, so that I can see what they can do. And I took this argument that had some cultural features that are of other cultures, and you don't find them in American culture. So the prompt was, write me a letter, trying to persuade me to come and teach in person in Bangladesh rather than online. And this student started the letter by saying, what a wonderful person I am, and I'm a super professor, and all this stuff. Typical, in Latin America, we would do that. And then she asked me about coming, in person and stuff like that. But when you're writing to a professor or a person that you want to ask something and has more authority than you go through all this lauding, telling how wonderful the person is. And then when I ran it by ChatGPT, it corrected the grammar and things like that, or made suggestions, but kept that first paragraph. Then I gave ChatGPT the same prompt I had given the student, and the argument was an American argument, had absolutely no feature of lauding the person you were. So that's why it's important that the students write first, so it doesn't whitewash their culture. Anyway, so you were asking about ways that we can use it. Well, I think the goals that I use are something that you can apply, improve the academic English, and in this case, as a tool to reinforce the learning of SFL features. It works really nicely with SFL. But you can use it other ways. What I'm learning to do now, I never stop. I'm going to be 102 and I'm going to be doing something different. But anyway, what I'm learning to do now is to create my own chatbot. So far, and that is hard. That's delayed my Alzheimer's by 5 years, I tell you. So far, all I've been able to do is get my chatbot to demonstrate the construction of biography, of the use of different verb types, and the function they have in a narrative, and in this case, it's a biography, with a text that it has, that my chatbot has, then the student or the teacher taking the course would give them can give them a text, and I acted as if I was a person teaching the course, gave my text, and my chatbot deconstructed it, doing the same kind of task. And then I wanted it to do joint construction. So the student or the teacher gives a text, and the chatbot guides them through finding the verbs. I talk about verbs with teachers because I talk about process. They don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, other people use process, but anyway, and what, whether they are, and I take the denominations that Bev Deriwanka uses, whether they are action verbs or sensing verbs or saying verbs, etc. And then what function do they have in a narrative? And I couldn't get it to do that. But then one of the techies, because I'm creating this chatbot and I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, but we have techies there that help us. And one of the techies that I'm in love with, that guy, I'm not going to let him go, told me, give your training, because I have to train my chatbot, to Claude, which is like a ChatGPT, but he likes it better. So I gave it to Claude and tell, I'm trying to get my chatbot to do this, this, and this. When I give these instructions, and it won't do it. So it gave me a new set of instructions, and it worked like a charm. My chatbot did deconstruction and was really tough, It wouldn't do anything for the student. It really helped the student do it themselves and then check on it. So if you ever try to create your own chatbot, that's a good strategy to have. Anyway, so I'm all excited with that. Now I'm going to see if I can do another genre, maybe now nominal groups or something different. But I don't know. It's going to take me an eternity to get a full chatbot. But that's the idea. And I'm with a group of faculty and of science and literature or whatever, and everybody's doing their own chatbot to use it almost like a TA in your course, So unfortunately, we are actually using the platform that came from Sydney, and and there is enough in the language models that they know SFL. So I didn't have to train them in SFL. They knew, they even used, the processes and more the technical terms of SFL. So I had to train them to use the simpler terms that I used with teachers. So that's great, because that would have been really tough. Anyway, so that's a different way to use. But anyway, so I'm just kind of finding my way in this and trying to figure out what other people do by seeing what my colleagues in my workshop group are learning or are trying.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So you've already mentioned the role of the information that ChatGPT gives as acting in the source of a meta-text way, or there's some elements of that available there, and also inserting use of ChatGPT into the teaching and learning cycle. And along those lines, and even thinking about your chatbot, how do you see the SFL genre pedagogy evolving with the integration of AI tools like ChatGPT? And we can even think about for the teaching of academic writing.
Well, one thing is that in seeing how detailed and specific my instructions to my chatbot had to be. It can influence the way I do the teaching and learning cycle into being a lot more specific, because I learned that from being too general, it wasn't learning. So if it wasn't learning, maybe it is as hard for the students. So maybe we need to be much more specific when we do the teaching and learning cycle, and break, so they were doing this deconstruction. The goal was, what's the function of different types of verbs in a narrative? But the deconstruction had to be step by step. First, find all the verbs in the text, then classify the verbs by verb type, then tell me how relational, what's the function of relational verbs in a narrative, what's the function of saying verbs and sensing verbs and things like that. So for my chatbot, I had to break it a lot more. And while if I was doing it with students, I would probably say the first thing, what's the function of verbs in narratives, and deconstruct the text to be able to find to explain that. No, so maybe that's one way that it can influence the teaching and learning cycle. But I don't know. I may learn from my chatbot when I teach the course next year, because my students all in the interview kept saying, you have to be more explicit. And I thought I had been explicit already, but obviously I hadn't, especially for those who had never used ChatGPT, and because SFL was new for everybody. So maybe that can be an impact. Now, I would love to work with high school teachers to see if doing something similar to what I did in my class, what's the impact it has on their students. I mentioned it to one high school teacher, and she said, "Oh, I would have to get 1 million permissions from the principal and everybody," and that's. I mean, I asked permission of the university before doing this project. I didn't want to get into trouble. But in schools are much more, K-12 schools can be a more bureaucratic, and they are so paranoid about ChatGPT, which is, it's a shame. The kids are going to use them, so why not take advantage of it?
Right. So maybe you can talk to us more about some of the other ways that you're incorporating AI in your teaching and work with SFL, inclusive of maybe future projects, like passion projects that you can see yourself taking on.
Well, right now I'm going to try to improve what I did last year when I teach a course again next fall, and see if I can incorporate the use of my chatbot as a support system, because the thing is that the University of Bangladesh gives me a TA, but the TA are, they are majors in economics or something like that, or public policy or something like that. So SFL is very new. They are super bright women, but SFL and language is very new to them. So maybe my chatbot will indeed help my students or help my TA. But I think maybe other people have ideas, because I haven't gone. I mean, I think I've done as much as I can at this point.
Yeah. So maybe we've sort of touched on this topic, and like as a final question, maybe you can help us think through some of the potential risks of over-reliance on AI tools in educational contexts, and how you would recommend that educators mitigate those?
Yeah, my biggest concern is this notion of taking what the AI tool gives you blind without losing your power of decision making. That is really concerning, and because they don't always give you the right thing, and certainly when you're crossing cultures, they don't give you the right thing. So that's something. It should be seen as a tool and not as a master. And some people see it as a master rather than as a tool, and a tool that has its advantages, but it doesn't have. So if you have a theory or that you can use it to be critical of what it gives you. And my colleagues were saying, a guy who was teaching philosophy, that the kids would take this stuff and put it in their papers, and it was wrong. So in order to know that it was wrong, they needed to have the knowledge of philosophy, to know that it was wrong. But they take it uncritically, and that is just sad to think that you cannot think and you cannot learn as well as this this artificial tool.
And you mentioned before, Maria, at the beginning when you were giving us the context of your class, that many of these students are very, very focused on being perfect, right? Turning in something perfect. Similarly, I know many of us are also faced with students who are very A-focused, right? And so I wonder how much of the context around high stakes or achieving grades and what grades is then connected to subsequently for the trajectory of students' lives, right, careers. I wonder how much that plays into how students position themselves and then use ChatGPT.
Yeah, I think so, because I find it, I haven't tried it when I teach. I usually teach teachers in an entire school, and I haven't tried it with them because I haven't faced the fact that teachers would be using ChatGPT except for finding mental texts and things like that. But I would think it would be a totally different situation, because the teachers are in the courses because they want to because the school wants to change how they teach writing, and so they want to learn and they want to implement and they want to have feedback on their implementation, and there's no grade there. I mean, they have to do certain tasks so that they get a certificate, but it's a totally different context, much nicer to teach. But the chatbot, my created chatbot, my SFL expert chatbot, would be great with teachers, because the courses are they're 4-week courses, so it's fast. So for them to go back and get help from a chatbot would be great to do all these things. Especially, I mean, what I'm doing in my chatbot is thinking of those teachers about, the notion of deconstructing text is like a light turn on and things like that. So it's very thin. Yeah, I agree. It's this desire to get A's and stuff like that makes them a slave of the AI. So we have to change that mentality, but I did change, because I had my TA observe them in another class, and they were acting very different in the other class.
Interesting. Yeah. And I also hear you describing that chatbot as useful when we're trying to teach SFL or SFL tools to our students, how that chatbot can provide a little bit more of an individualized space, iterative, interactive to some degree, for students or teachers to practice application or see the deconstruction or just have a little bit more extended time that traditionally would have required us to do that, right? Sit with them. I mean, we have so much time in class, and there's more would always be.
Yeah, and the thing is that the way I created is it will text given by the teacher. It's not only the text that it has. So that was very important, and it worked. So the teacher would give text to demonstrate the construction, and the teacher would do the test to do the joint construction together. So it was the teacher text. So it could be a text that the teacher is going to use with the students. If they have the chance to practice, with the chatbot, it would be great. And I couldn't, if I have 30 people in the online class, I couldn't do it. I sometimes, I do use the text that they're using, but I couldn't use the text of 30 students. So that would be perfect.
Yeah. And I also am thinking, just sorry, as I hear you speak, it also solves a little bit of a problem for some of us in institutions where we don't have the funding or the availability of TAs, right? And so you talked about the chatbot being kind of like a TA. And so it might be beneficial in that sense as well, like offering an additional resource. Yeah. So thank you so much, Dr. Brisk, for all your answers. I think we're at a point where it would be great to turn it over to audience questions. And I'll have Laura lead the way on that one.
Right. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Brisk. There have been a few questions along the way, so I'm just going to start with the first one from the chat. And after we go through the questions that were put into the chat, if folks in our Zoom space would like the opportunity to ask a question, we should still have time. Our session was scheduled to go until 4 o'clock. So the first question I saw was from Linda, and she says, at the end, would you please speak a bit about creating the citations for the ChatGPT use? Thank you.
At the end, I couldn't hear well.
Citations. How would a student acknowledge in a reference list that they've used ChatGPT? Was that
Yeah, that's a good. Is that Linda?
Linda.
Hi, Linda. Nice to see you. What I did with my students in my class, I had them, whatever came from ChatGPT, in bold. So I knew what it came, and because they had to talk about it, it needed to be highlighted. So that's what I did. I had them, anything that ChatGPT gave them had to be in bold. Anyway, but it's an important question, because they should be conscious that they need to acknowledge that they need to acknowledge the use.
Thank you. The next question comes from Stephen, and he asks, I found that ChatGPT will sometimes make authoritative arguments that lack evidence. Did this issue come up in the course?
Well, in some cases, it did actually make a change in the argument that was wrong. It wasn't what the student wanted to say. Some students would fight back, but some didn't, and that was of concern. So yeah, that's why we can't use it blindly. That's why it has to be it has to be critical. Yeah.
Thank you. Sabrina, you had the next question. Would you like me to read it, or did you want to ask it yourself?
Sure, you can go ahead and read it.
Okay. So Sabrina asks, how did you come up with the prompts that you used to scaffold students' use of ChatGPT? What was that experimentation that you engaged in to develop those?
Yeah, what I did is I used I used it with last year's papers. So I tested, and I also had my TA, since we start meeting a couple of months before the course. I had her, so we were in communication. But the most helpful was testing the prompts with last year's papers to see whether they would get what I expect them to get. Yeah. And if you want any specific, I have a little report written, because I had to write a report at the end to the university, and I have an appendix with actually the templates of the assignments that has all the prompts. So if you're interested in that, I can email them to you.
That would be fabulous. From my perspective, it feels like you've done so much of the groundwork that many of us are grappling with, but I may not be there yet. And so,
yeah, I don't know if you want to. I can send it to you, and you can put it when you put the recording. I could put that. I can give you the template, and you can put it when you put the recording of the session.
I can see by the response in the chat that I think everybody would be very grateful to have that. So thank you so much, not only for sharing your expertise, but also sharing the work involved. That is all of the questions in the chat. So at this point, if there are folks in our Zoom space who would like to ask a question, the floor is open. The metaphorical floor.
Yeah, maybe somebody can share other ways that they've used ChatGPT in their courses.
So either a question or your own use of ChatGPT or AI in general would be most welcome at this time. It's an open conversation.
Hi, this is Ruslana. Good to see everyone. I use sometimes when I want to, I use these chatbots when I train teachers in the professional development that I provide, and so it's a huge time saver. And one of the latest tools I've used was Napkin AI. Napkin as like napkin. Napkin AI helps. It has its quirks, but it helps me represent paragraphs and the logical relationships in the paragraphs through a graphic representation. So for students to grapple with the logical meta function, what are the relationships between ideas in a paragraph? Napkin AI literally creates a visual. It could be class, subclass. It could be causes and effects. It could be multiple causes coming out of one event. And so it analyzed it and created that flow that connects ideas in a paragraph. It also helps represent, I'm gonna try to pull this up real quick. It's the blog I write for teachers about saying. Recently I was just writing about saying verbs because people were telling me kids can't replace said with other things. I'm like, well, we have to teach them. So I used a lot of Napkin AI for these graphics in this blogs, just to show something, because I work with classroom teachers who don't have a lot of SFL training, and they need entry points that are easily accessible and not cumbersome. So that's kind of how I've used it. I've also today I was training it on appraisal system, and it did okay. I actually was really impressed. I was analyzing a children's story of Dear Mrs. LaRue, Letters from Obedience School. It's Dr. Brisk, it's from your text. And so I went to the library and I got the book. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do appraisal analysis and to teach teachers who haven't had much of SFL, but they are running out of ideas of how to teach evaluative language. And so it created activities, ChatGPT 4.0. I used the paid version, and it created activities of how to do negative and positive evaluation or appreciation. And that was fun. The generation of activities for teachers to be used in the classroom was saved me time and gave me ideas I could never consider.
So those are great examples. Now the napkin, did the images went with the text?
Yes, yeah. So this one is not in the blog, it's in my PowerPoint, where I literally have a text on negative effects of, I'm analyzing an argument in social networking and social media impacting the teenagers. And so it had, I have a paragraph that's verbal text, and then below it I have a graphic representation. So it had negative, it literally takes the language out of the text and shows cause-effect relationships through cause-effect diagram. And it was eye-opening to teachers that kids who are grappling with logical meanings, they need both things. They need the language and they need the graphic representation. They need to go up and down the semantic wave, right? To go down to the graphic representation, back up to text. So the warning about Napkin AI is that when you and it's free, when you input text into it, it might change the words that are represented in the graphic. They're like a synthesis word. And then, however, you can click on the box and change it. You can change words. You can change icons. It's really
so you can
fabulous.
correct what it does.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And they're free, because if they're not
Napkin
free.
AI is free.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. Thank you, Ruslana.
Yeah, good to see you.
Are there other questions for Dr. Brisk or suggestions of how you use AI in your own practice?
Now, what I was thinking today when I was reading about the Chinese AI and stuff like that, after all this work, by next year we might be in another planet when it comes to AI. So I don't know what I'll be doing, whether I'll be improving this or something else. That's a problem with this technology, that you do something and then you want to improve it, and it has changed tremendously. So we'll see what happens.
Dr. Brisk, I have a question, if it's okay.
Yeah.
You said that in your planning for next year, when you work with the women at the Asian College, that you were planning certain improvements. Are there any that you have in mind that you haven't shared with us yet?
Well, I think I have to teach the aspects of the SFL theory on the language of argumentation much earlier if I want them to use an SFL lens in being critical of ChatGPT, because I have to pace that because it's difficult, but I should start pushing that earlier. Otherwise, I was demanding them to do something that they hadn't assimilated the theory to be able to do that. So that's for sure. And the other is, I was modeling the TLC with respect to writing arguments, but I had to do the TLC with respect to using the ChatGPT and being critical. I had to do that too, and that's what I missed. So I have to do that. Yeah. So it's doing the TLC with everything, not just the text of the genre.
Thank you. And so I guess one more question, if there aren't others from the group. In our preparations for our conversation, Sabrina and I prepared some questions, but you may have made some preparations and we didn't ask the right questions to elicit that information. Is there anything that you had prepared to share with us that didn't come up in the conversation yet?
So I think there are some people thanking you, Maria, if you're seeing the chat. But any questions for us, Dr. Brisk, that you think the audience should be thinking about as we depart from the?
I mean, all of you are much younger than I am, so you should be testing new things and teaching me how to do it. That's what they should be doing. No, so yeah, I like to see and learn from other people. You know what they are thinking and they are doing it, but the thing is to work with our institutions so that they are enlightened about it and they don't forbid it just outright, but find ways to make it useful. That I think is important, whatever you're using, and deal with with the administration so that they understand that it can be useful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brisk, for your time and your wisdom and sharing your activities with us. I think it's very insightful. And somebody mentioned in the chat that it's really helping us to think about AI in a different way. And I echo that sentiment.
Yeah, that's another thing that the students said in their comments, that it made them think about ChatGPT in a different way. It made them feel less stressed because they didn't feel they were cheating. So they were very grateful that I had purposefully used it and encouraged the use and showing them how it could be used, for their advantage. So, yeah, it's great to see all my colleagues, although some of them are not showing their faces. But anyway, I see their names, and so nice to see you all. Hi, Andres, you're driving. So, well, it was great to see everybody, and I see the comments in the chat box.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for coming, and
Yes.
and get in touch if you have any questions or you want anything.
Yes, and as a reminder, this session was recorded and it will be posted on the NASFLA website. We are going to have another conversations webinar around May, and that will be with Nicole Sifrin, who was our early career awardee for NASFLA. Beth already shared in the chat a link to register if you'd like to receive the newsletter with our upcoming events such as these. You can just register there. And then if you want to follow in a different space, there's also NASFLA in Blue Sky, which is a new social media platform. So thanks everybody so much for your time. Thank you, Dr. Brisk, for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Brisk.
Nice to see everybody.
Nice to
see you. Lisa. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Maria.
Thanks,
Nice to see you, Laura.